When you think about retro games, pixel art games, or even old RPG Maker games, what is the first thing that comes to mind? Most likely, nostalgia. That nostalgic feeling can be so powerful that it makes you look at older games through rose-tinted glasses. Games that maybe were not even that good back then, somehow you still spent hundreds of hours playing them, and now you are desperately trying to find that same feeling again. In other words, welcome to Drakantos. According to the developers, Drakantos is an MMORPG with a nostalgic pixel art style combined with fast-paced action combat and more than 20 playable heroes. I should also mention that this video was recorded during closed beta 2, which means the game is still not officially released yet. But since I got invited to participate in the beta, I decided to make a review about it as well. The developers behind the game, Wingen Game Studios, have not released any previous titles, which means Drakantos could either become the game that puts the studio on the map or the game that completely breaks it. The fact that the game will be free to play also makes me wonder how aggressive the monetization and microtransactions will become later on, but that remains to be seen. And honestly, after spending several hours in the beta, I can already tell that Drakantos is the kind of game that will split players into two groups. Some people will see it as a love letter to old school MMOs, others will see it as extremely outdated, and honestly, that is exactly what we need to talk about. The story of Drakantos is a bit more complex than it first appears. The game takes place in Eldrass, a fantasy world trapped in a constant conflict between humans, necromancers, demons, and various monstrous creatures. What I found interesting is that the game does not start with you playing as some random adventurer killing rats at level 1. Instead, you play as already established heroes that are important to the world itself. Each hero has their own lore, rivalries, and backstory, almost like characters from League of Legends or Dota. The overall atmosphere is also not your typical good versus evil fantasy story. Instead, the world feels like it is permanently at war, where every character seems to have their own motivations and secrets. Right now, the lore still feels somewhat fragmented because the game is not fully released yet, but the direction is already very clear. Drakantos is not trying to be just another MMO focused entirely on grinding and random quests. Instead, it seems to be built around the idea of a hero-based MMO, where the characters themselves are at the center of the experience. How important the story is will ultimately depend on you. But before we talk more about lore, we need to see how the game actually plays. After choosing your server and character name, the game immediately throws you into the hero selection screen. Each character has their own role and playstyle, but the roles themselves are very traditional: tank, DPS, and healer. Nothing revolutionary here. At the same time, I think that simplicity adds a lot to the nostalgic feeling the game is trying to create. After checking out every hero, I decided to go with Stormlancer because honestly, she just looks awesome. Although I have to admit the samurai almost convinced me to switch immediately. One very important thing is that you can swap heroes whenever you want. Every hero is unlocked from the very beginning, and the developers already confirmed that more heroes will be added later on. After choosing your character, the game starts introducing you to its tutorial and first quests. This is where I got the chance to test the combat and figure out very quickly whether the gameplay was going to work for me or not. And honestly, I think this is the exact moment where Drakantos will either lose players instantly or create a hardcore fanbase. Movement is limited to 4 directions. You cannot move diagonally, and combat follows the exact same logic. For many players, this will immediately feel outdated, but honestly, the game never tries to hide what it is. Drakantos presents itself exactly as advertised: an old-school MMO with tile-based movement and simplified combat. Many abilities are large area of effect attacks, which means the game focuses more on positioning and timing rather than precise aiming. Personally, I adapted to it fairly quickly because I grew up playing games like this, But at the same time, I completely understand why some players might find the combat too rigid. After finishing the first dungeon, you eventually arrive at the main hub where you can finally see other players running around with their own heroes and cosmetics. This is also where the radial menu becomes available, which honestly makes navigation much easier, especially for controller players. And yes, the game has a surprising amount of customization. You can change the colors of almost every equipment piece, use different skins, mounts, emotes, and even customize your character display stand. Honestly, this helps the game a lot because otherwise there was a real risk of every hero starting to look identical after a while. The gameplay loop itself is fairly straightforward. You have main quests that progress the story and side quests that can be completed whenever you want. What I like though is that many side quests actually contain small stories and feel more personal instead of just being random fetch quests. As you swap heroes, the gameplay also changes alongside them. Yes, many characters share a similar gameplay foundation, but their abilities and builds start making a huge difference later on, especially during endgame content and PvP. Abilities can also be modified using orbs that increase damage or add entirely new effects. Most of these upgrades come from adventures, which are essentially the game's main PvE activity. Think of them as Diablo-style dungeons that you complete alongside other players. Each adventure contains clear objectives, optional secondary goals, and rewards based on your overall performance. And honestly, this is where I think most players will spend the majority of their time after finishing the main story. This is basically the game's main grind. Each hero also has their own separate level and power progression, meaning that every character needs to be individually leveled up. If you completely ignore a hero, they will naturally fall behind. Besides abilities and basic attacks, there are also artifacts, which are active items usable during combat that can completely change how you approach certain encounters. And honestly, everything already sounds fairly deep, and we have not even talked about PvP yet. The PvP side of Drakantos feels completely different compared to PvE. Right now there are only two main modes available. The first one is the classic push, the cart, or control style mode. The second one is Assault, which feels heavily inspired by MOBAs, where you need to destroy towers and eventually the enemy base. In PvP, every hero starts fully maxed out with all abilities unlocked. The game also prevents duplicate heroes on the same team. So if someone already picked the dwarf, you can no longer choose him yourself. Honestly, my first PvP matches were an absolute disaster. I barely understood what my own character was even doing, but I kept playing simply because the PvP systems immediately made me curious. Assault especially seems to place a huge emphasis on team fighting and coordination, and honestly, for a closed beta, the PvP already felt surprisingly deep. The only problem was that every single time I queued for PvP, I somehow got matched against server admins and got absolutely destroyed. But honestly, I still had fun, and I think that says a lot about the potential of the game. It became very clear to me that Drakantos will probably have a massive learning curve, and that the ranked mode planned by the developers could become extremely competitive for players willing to grind it seriously. The first thing that immediately stands out in Drakantos is the art direction. The game uses a very detailed pixel art style combined with modern visual effects that preserve the retro look without making the game feel outdated. A lot of people compare it visually to games like Ragnarok Online, MapleStory, or older fantasy SNES titles. And honestly, the comparison makes perfect sense. The overall atmosphere leans heavily into dark fantasy. The environments, colours, and monster designs constantly make the world feel like it is stuck in an endless war. Even though the graphics are pixelated, the spell effects and lighting make combat look surprisingly intense and chaotic. The soundtrack uses classic fantasy themes, sometimes mysterious and melancholic, other times extremely epic during combat encounters. It is exactly the kind of soundtrack that perfectly complements exploration and dungeon crawling without ever becoming annoying. So after spending time with the closed beta, is Drakantos actually worth playing? Honestly, yes. But with a few important caveats. First of all, it is important to understand that Drakantos is not a traditional MMO where you create your own custom character and slowly build them from scratch. Instead, the game fully commits to its hero-based system. Think of it almost like a mix between an old-school MMO and a hero shooter like Overwatch. Each hero has their own abilities, progression, playstyle, and identity. And if you want to become stronger with a specific character, you actually need to invest time into learning and leveling that hero directly. There is no universal main character for the entire game, and honestly, I think this is exactly where the community will become divided. For some players, this hero-based structure will probably become one of the most interesting aspects of the game. For others, it will immediately become a deal breaker. If you are the type of player who prefers creating your own character and becoming attached to a single main, Drakantos might simply not be for you. But if you love old-school MMOs, pixel art, dungeon grinding and classic fantasy vibes, then Drakantos has a very high chance of pulling you in, especially if you feel nostalgic for games like Ragnarok Online or Tibia. Personally, I think the game's biggest strength is its identity. It is not trying to perfectly copy the biggest MMOs currently on the market. Instead, it tries to combine the nostalgia of older MMOs with modern hero-based gameplay ideas. And honestly, that combination makes it stand out quite a lot. And that wraps up this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please consider liking the video and maybe even subscribing to the channel. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.